Hello and welcome to the Adastra podcast. My name is Mark Cahoot and I lead the governance practice at Adastra, a global AI, data, and cloud systems integrator. We're coming to you today from Las Vegas at the occasion of AWS reInvent 2025. And joining me today is Kevin McCurdy, Global CPG Segment Lead for the AWS Partner Network. Kevin connects AWS with strategic software and services partners to drive innovation for consumer packaged goods. He brings over 25 years in supply chain, category management, and demand signal management, with leadership roles at E2Open and as a co-founder at Orchestro and Mercari. He's worked with brands like Coca-Cola, General Mills, Kellogg's, PepsiCo, Unilever, and Kraft Heinz. Kevin, I'm sure you have a really busy week ahead of you this reInvent, so thanks so much for taking the time and welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely, and it's great to be here, Mark. Thanks. I appreciate Adastra having me here for this podcast.
Great to see you. Let me just dive in. And I think that the main sort of inevitable and compelling subject that's in front of us today is CPG verticals' journey to Gen AI and agentic AI's use in business transformation, right? Especially with agentic AI these days. So I'd love to tap your brain and learn from your experience as global CPG segment lead for the Amazon Partner Network. To start us off, what are some of the patterns and transformation opportunities you've seen CPG players seize to deploy AI and reinvent their business? What excites you most about the future of technology and partnership in the CPG industry, Kevin?
Yeah. What's great is in our space, the areas that we're seeing in terms of generative AI is in classic CPG solution areas of supply chain,
right?
Sales, marketing, manufacturing, all opportunities to automate some areas of redundant tasks, but also to add optimization and thinking of leveraging data in common decision making, whether it's demand forecasting, supply chain planning, et cetera.
Right on.
The interesting part is this AI ML sounds like it's all new and everyone's been going crazy about generative AI, now agentic, but companies have been leveraging AI ML for probably 20 plus years.
Yeah.
So it's not anything new. The interesting part is when you threw generative in front of it and generative AI.
Minds explode.
Yeah. People were fearful, scared, I'll say 2 years ago. And now what's very interesting is kind of the excitement and people wanting to learn and how they can adopt it in their daily use cases that they use within the consumer goods industry.
So initial anxiety, stranger dangers passing on and moving to desire, in fact.
Yeah, it's the interesting part was, if I told you a year ago, or we talked about this a year ago, the biggest question probably was fear. If you ask everybody to raise their hand, it was often the fear of AI ML and what it mean to their job. Am I going to lose my job because of this mysterious thing?
Yeah.
Now it's more about the excitement and where can I apply it to actually make my everyday redundant tasks automated, and I can focus on higher value type
activities,
processes and activities. Yeah.
Gotcha. Let's turn now to a little bit about what AWS's role is in supporting CPG companies. How does AWS help CPG companies address their most pressing challenges with this journey with AI adoption? What are the main areas where your expertise and support helps them out?
Okay. So obviously from a technology and the platform perspective, so with regards to SageMaker, some of the different services and tools, Amazon Bedrock, those are kind of foundational, data layers, et cetera. Our role is really to help, where do I apply this technology into the use cases of our business partners. So we break it down in the consumer goods and retail area really to three areas. AI/ML can be applied in product because that's the things that people are buying and selling. So retailers are selling, manufacturers are selling to either consumers directly or to the retailer. Employee, and that is the employee use of these tools in their everyday processes, and then the customer. How do the areas, if customers are trying to do virtual try-on or search for a product, using AI/ML to do those? So we really focus in those three areas. So product, employee, and customer. And then there's use cases under those. So as I touched on, customer, it's how do I search on a product or that virtual tryout, or it could be customer service. So conversational analytics of needing to get help and service on a product, or where do I buy a new product? On the product side, it gets into things like product discovery, product recommendations, and we'll talk about some of those. And then the employee is the whole knowledge summarization, report summarization. In our space for consumer goods, one of the unique ones is planogram automation. So how do I automate the shelf to what it needs to look like to optimally sell to our customers?
Interesting. The data governance guy in me is turning to, my mind is turning to master, to master data along a few core domains, but I'm also thinking about how tightly they're linked to the value chain, and indeed that you're hitting all of the major productive value-added areas of the supply chain.
Absolutely.
The value chain, pardon me.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, governance around both on the product and that master data of how do we align what products look like to a retailer, to a manufacturer, but also all of the PII data of the consumer. Especially as we use AI/ML to do hyper-personalized recommendations, we have to be totally respectful of any PI regulations, and some of those are different. Obviously, globally, as you know, EMEA has different rules than we may have in the U.S., and even in the U.S. at the state level, some different unique rules. So we got to be respectful of those as we use this technology in making those, and also making, I say sometimes, those hyper-personalized recommendations, not making them too creepy. To the consumer, that we know too much, but the expectation from the consumer is they know you have so much data, especially Gen Z. They're expecting
that degree of personalization,
personalization around product recommendations, and almost wanting that. I don't know what the knowing me. It's not too creepy for some of us that are older. Maybe for more creepy how much they know about me. So
understood. Yeah. No. So that sounds like quite the marketeer's challenge. In fact, in terms of managing perceptions of the whole process.
Absolutely.
But thanks for highlighting the various compliance areas and the need to handle PI sensitive information and in the underlying data, and also the use of it, of course, in AI. Wonder if you could give us an example, just to make, where the rubber hits the road, where AWS Solutions, in partnership with an SI like ourselves, like Adastra, made a tangible impact for a global CPG brand.
Absolutely. And I think the work you guys have done with Mark Anthony Group, it's actually one of the use cases that excites me most in that you actually used AI/ML to bring a real valid use case to life, and one that is applicable to almost every consumer goods company on the planet. And that is, they were challenged with, which a lot of companies are, how do I take all of this data around sales, product assortment, price, optimize it to figure out what are the right product to sell in what markets. What were they doing? Probably a lot of that foundationally in Excel. Access, VLOOKUPs, each category manager, each product manager probably doing a little bit differently. To your point, data residing in different areas and not consistency in how it's being done, absolutely in the silos. And again, then from a productivity perspective, very manual, time consuming, couldn't react quickly. Adastra came in, helped Mark Anthony Group, one, to set that data foundation of the product information, sales information, syndicate information, which is other intelligence or third party on making recommendations. Set that foundation, security protocols with that data, and then first using the AI/ML to do the forecasting and predictive part of that. The secondary part, which I think was great then, is applying the generative AI layer, which is then the sales recommender, makes the recommendation around the assortment, but then actually generating the script for the seller on what to say and in the tone of that seller. So as they're going into each different store, in each different county, market, town, they know there's unique things we need to know about the demographics, the assortment recommendations, et cetera. But then the tone of me versus the tone of Mark going in, and the customer that you're selling to all have different personalities. So using generative AI to make those recommendations, but actually write the script for each of those. The great beauty of that then is automation, productivity, but actually giving higher value opportunities for that seller to go in and look at other opportunities to sell product, engage with the customer, maybe set out other future promotional activities or other, creative things that help them drive business even more.
I think there's a few cool points that make this such an outstanding lighthouse sort of project to demonstrate the theory and practice, really, and that's to what extent these are alpha to omega sort of end-to-end efforts, right, to deploy from the foundations to the point where salespeople are actually identifying new, shall we say, psychological markets, people's own markets and things like that.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that's making my synapses fire, at least the ones that remain, is the degree of personalization and customization of tone. I'm just riffing on the same theme we were already talking about, but the degree of it at a real individual level, I think that's really a new frontier in terms of marketing and sales.
Yeah, and I think companies aspire to it. I think individuals inside of a company aspire to it. But what Adastra did with Mark Anthony Group is actually allowed it to scale. So now not just one or two really special salespeople that can take that skill, but now I can actually elevate that across my entire sales force and touch every customer that actually helps me drive sales within there. And like I said, I think the beauty, at least being the owner of the consumer goods industry, every customer in the market has this same problem. So you can go and now replicate this for any other CPG company, you name it, within apparel, footwear, food, beverage, home health, beauty, consumer durable, all have that same problem. But then you can also allow them to use the uniqueness of their data, their master data, to solve the same common problem.
The promise of mass customization sort of taken to a new apogee, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Let me draw you out a little bit more on the role of AWS partners like Adastra, but let's just abstract from there in delivering business results for AWS's customers. In fact, I saw a statistic when I was researching this that 4 out of 5 AWS customers use partners, SIs, et cetera, to accelerate Gen AI adoption. How do AWS validated partners complement your AWS's own strong builder culture that I really admire, giving CPGs quick wins without, giving up ownership? And where do you think that your partners, the SIs, the ISVs, add the most value, Kevin?
Yeah, I think the importance on, especially in this whole journey to Gen AI, and I think probably any use case, but in the Gen AI space, we started out, first it was purely on education. A lot of customers wondered, what is this thing, generative AI? What is a foundational model? What is an LLM?
Yeah.
And so I think first, the ability for partners like Adastra to be able to go in and help articulate those benefits or understanding of those different, what those terms mean, what the technology means, how to map those was key, and I think is key. There's others around the importance of the data foundation. You talked about governance and security. That all plays into this, and you guys have, or Adastra has, skill sets in each of those areas that complements the technology. So how do I roll this technology out? You as a partner can help in that rollout and then scale into the enterprise.
Right.
The other areas are things around change management.
Okay.
And again, this is a new technology. It's a new way of doing business. So organizations need that training. And that's one of the things we haven't touched on a little bit, but the area within this, when that fear question I talked about earlier that employees had, training is critical. They've not used some of these tools and technologies. So being able to train, so you do help the change management process throughout, I think is important. It builds confidence and earns trust.
Yep.
One of our leadership principles is earn trust. It helps earn trust with that customer, but the customer with that technology.
Understood. I think one of the things that we've seen is that change management activities, training, right, evangelizing, et cetera, sort of move left in the project plan, in the deployment plan a lot, right?
Yeah.
From the early outsets of, we say, playing with it, experimenting with it, right? Skunkworks, R&D and stuff like that. But at the same time, bringing people along so that when you actually do go to production, through the various hoops and gates that requires,
correct,
people are there with you.
Absolutely.
When we work with clients, just at other partners work with clients, of course, for example, we regularly work on use case identification, ideation, AI days, selection, POCs, data readiness and integration, vendor selection, change management, and ongoing monitoring. If I were to try to nail you down on one thing or a couple things that you think distinguishes the most impactful partnerships that have worked best, while I thank you for bringing us up on the Mark Anthony Group example, but going more broadly, what do you think are the most impactful partnerships that you've seen in the CPG sector?
I think one, it's helping that customer. It's purely not just a technical play, but it is understanding the actual business that they're trying to solve. So if it's a food company, understanding the domain knowledge expertise of that business. Apparel footwear has some of its own unique challenges. If I'm working in supply chain versus manufacturing, there's unique words, language, things that need to be respected within those. So I think the partner understanding the domain earns trust that gets you beyond, this just isn't someone coming in to implement a piece of technology, but they actually understand my business. The other is that data foundation. So actually understanding the data that is going into the decision making, I think, is also critical. Data for a consumer goods company may be 50%, maybe very similar around the product, the location to an auto manufacturer. But then there's unique things around weather, demographic data, and others. And how do I need to apply that in that AI/ML processing that goes in? So I think that, again, I go back to the domain expertise as we're working is very critical. But then I think also understanding, to your point and your expertise in governance, areas around the rules around security and governance and data. You need to be able to provide that knowledge to the customer. They don't know. Often they don't have that deep expertise, and we're still evolving in this AI/ML space. Governments are still putting new laws coming into place and need to be being able to respect those. So I think all of that needs to come in, and partners provide that deep knowledge.
You actually just answered my next question there about what the no. That's it's very efficient. Actually, you see how AWS accelerates things. What strikes me about what you're saying, Kevin, is that despite the flashy newness of it all, right? Despite the fact that we've added Gen in front of AI, as you said earlier on, solid business foundations still apply. Business at the table, business expertise, making sure that your house is in order with your data management and data provisioning, data availability, data governance. Let me just ask, have the companies that you worked with struggled with this area a great deal, or do you find that they're already well positioned to take the next step in terms of the compliance and regulatory readiness, et cetera?
I think they're still early stage, and there's still opportunities. You brought something up that I think is important, that when we do any of these things, people think of AI/ML, generative AI, they think immediately tech. And so IT wants to own this. The best way of adoption that we've seen in this is to apply the use case. That's the business that's often bringing that. And so the interlock between business and technical is critical here. So I think that's something important to stress. But on that compliance and governance, I think very often companies start with POC. Hopefully they make it beyond POC to actual production. And then the key part is scale. And that scaling is where your governance comes in, because now that's where you need to be respecting of a lot of the rules. And you probably should be thinking about some of those early on, but often they don't in the eagerness to get started. But
just do it.
Yeah. And so we want to scale. And so that's where then the governance and those come into play. And I think we're still seeing it even with some of the models I'm seeing with customers. There are so many different models that can be applied to some of these decisions. Companies are trying right now, starting to put in rules and even contracts to say, hey, it respects to using Claude or Nova, But if we're going to introduce a new model into this haiku, we need to understand what that means before we agree to adopt. So there are things in those that are also still, I think, flushing out in this new world.
Right, especially as some Gen AI models from the explainability perspective are somewhat black boxes and things
Absolutely.
like that. Yes, very interesting. I think that just to riff on that for 1 second, one of the governance concepts that's always been our North Star at Adastra, that which we've shamelessly cribbed from just-in-time engineering, of course, is we call it just enough governance, right?
Okay,
A sweet spot between sustainability and overhead, right? Kind of thing. And it also means planning ahead,
yes,
right? Or if you will, roughing in what you're going to need to do in the future. So I'm totally aligned with you on that. I'm conscious of our time, Kevin, and I have one last question for you before we run out of it. And that's about CPGs who might still be on the fence, who are in that sort of, right now, that curiosity funnel that have moved past it. They see it's going on, and maybe they've taken a fast follower strategy, right? Which is, I think a very reasonable one for many organizations. Totally okay. Yeah, exactly. And they're looking to invest and accelerate their AI journeys now, get going. Where do you think they should focus? What are your top first steps to get them moving on Gen AI with AWS?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I encourage is starting from a use case. We lived through the world, and if I go back a couple of years, it was all about POC, then POC to production. Now we're in this the hot buzzword of agentic. I think, again, rather than doing a project to do a project, or because a board is pushing, because they're afraid they're behind other companies, hone in on what is the use case we think we can take advantage or make use, whether it's in supply chain, sales and marketing, manufacturing. Start from the use case, because from there we can actually see value and see now that I can scale that. And it's of something that's going to actually demonstrate value. If we're just doing Gen AI to play with Gen AI, those are the ones that often fail.
Right.
The other part I'll say is when you start with the use case, ensure, because what we often found in POCs, the gap became data. So now I'll say with that thinking, start with your use case, and make sure you have the right data to drive the use case in place. And I think with our customers, that's where partners like Adastra are going to come in to help, because often data is siloed. It's in a lot of different places. So it can help build that data foundation to actually drive an effective POC to see some value. And then you can also lead them on the path to scale. But also, how do I maybe leverage some of the things we've put in place for the next use case?
Right.
So I think that's all important. And then I think quickly move quickly on that once you have that use case identified, because I think there's typically opportunities.
So it sounds like there's a tension there, but a manageable one. That you're thinking about POCs, and to use the tried expression, think strategically, act tactically, which means thinking both upstream to solid foundations, data, governance, etc., but also think about productionization while you're doing the POC, right? Think about what the organizational people and process implications are going to be to allow you to scale and work with that. Yeah.
And with that, I'm going to say, again, selfishly, as the partner leader for our vertical, leverage your partners in this journey. They've done it with other customers. They have the expertise with the data. They have the expertise with the security, the governance, the regulations. So for any consumer goods company, again, a lot of this space around generative AI and agentic is new. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and lean on AWS. But also, as you said, the 4 and 5 partners are for us are leveraging 4 or 5 out of 5 customers are leveraging partners, and I think they bring great value.
Kevin, thank you. We're out of time, but this has been great. I asked you for gold nuggets, and you gave us gold bullion all in a really short time. So
hopefully so.
Big thanks to you for taking the time to speak to us today, and for your sharing that experience in enabling CPGs to transform their businesses with AI. I hope you have an amazing week here with your partners and clients at reInvent on the AI frontier. And to our audience today, thank you for being with us. If your team wants a low-risk first step, reach out to Adastra and let's build that quick win together. And as always, if you found this podcast useful, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe. Bye for now from Las Vegas.